They said Billy the Kid died in the dark. But what if the most important part of his life happened in the final hours before the gunshot? For more than 100 years, historians have argued over how he died, who betrayed him, and whether he even spoke his last words. But few have truly examined what Billy the Kid felt on his final night alive, the fear, the memories, the regrets, and the choices that sealed his fate. Because legends are made in gunfire, but truths are born in silence. Welcome to Untold Golden History, the channel where forgotten truths rise from the dust of time. Today, we pull back the curtain on one of the most famous outlaws in American history. Not the myth, not the dime novel hero, but the real human being behind the name. This is the untold, data-driven, historically grounded story of Billy the Kid's last night alive, a night that changed the American West forever. Billy the Kid was not born a legend. He was born Henry McCarty in 1859 into poverty, sickness, and uncertainty. Long before the West knew his name, he was just another forgotten boy in a nation expanding faster than it could care for its children. His father disappeared early. His mother, Catherine McCarty, struggled to survive, moving from city to city, Indiana, Kansas, Colorado, always chasing work, always fleeing hardship. By the time Henry was a teenager, his mother was dying of tuberculosis in New Mexico territory. When she finally passed in 1874, the boy who would become Billy the Kid was left alone in a violent land with no safety net. There were no social services, no second chances. Orphaned boys in the frontier didn't grow up. They adapted or they died. Henry adapted. He was small, quick, unusually polite, and frighteningly intelligent. Teachers remembered him as bright. Neighbors remembered him as respectful. But the West did not reward kindness. It rewarded speed. Speed with a horse, speed with a gun, speed in making brutal decisions. His first known crime wasn't murder. It was stealing food. That matters, because the myth paints Billy as a born killer, but the historical record shows something different. A boy pushed step by step into violence by circumstance, survival, and betrayal. By 16, he had already been jailed. By 17, he had killed his first man, Frank Windy Cahill, in what many historians believe was self-defense. Cahill was larger, drunk, and known for bullying the boy. The shot changed everything. From that moment on, Henry McCarty was no longer just a kid. He was Billy the Kid. The American frontier of the 1870s was not the romantic land shown in movies. It was lawless, corrupt, and ruled by power, not justice. Wealthy cattle barons controlled courts, sheriffs took bribes, murders went unpunished if the victim had no influence. This environment didn't create outlaws, it manufactured them. Billy became entangled in the Lincoln County War, one of the bloodiest range conflicts in New Mexico history. On one side stood powerful business interests known as the House. On the other stood smaller ranchers and merchants who fought back using hired guns. Billy fought for the losing side. By the end of the war, he was officially blamed for multiple killings. Some were exaggerated, some were real, but one thing was certain: Billy was now hunted. Yet here is the truth many Americans never hear. Billy the Kid was never convicted of most of the murders attributed to him. The famous number 21 men killed was a myth invented by newspapers to sell stories. Reliable historical evidence suggests the number was closer to 4 to 8, still deadly, but not monstrous. By 1880, Billy was tired. Letters and witness accounts suggest he wanted amnesty. He wanted a deal. He wanted to disappear into ordinary life. He even cooperated with authorities briefly, testifying against former allies in exchange for a promised pardon that never came.
That broken promise would shape his final year. Sheriff Pat Garrett, once an acquaintance and possibly even a friend, was elected sheriff of Lincoln County with one clear mission: capture Billy the Kid. Garrett was not evil, nor was he heroic. He was practical. The territory wanted Billy dead or captured. Garrett wanted his badge secure. In December 1880, Garrett succeeded. Billy was captured and jailed. In April 1881, he was convicted of killing Sheriff Brady and sentenced to hang. But Billy did what legends do. He escaped. On April 28, 1881, while being held at Lincoln County Courthouse under guard, Billy killed deputies James Bell and Bob Olinger and vanished into the desert. The escape humiliated authorities across the territory. Newspapers exploded, rewards were increased, posses formed, and Pat Garrett swore this time would be different. That brings us to July 14, 1981. The final night. Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory was quiet under the desert stars. The Pecos River whispered through cottonwood trees. Adobe homes slept beneath a moonlit sky. Billy the Kid was hiding among friends, people who had sheltered him before, people who owed him loyalty, people who feared the law more than they feared him. He was only 21 years old. Accounts from locals suggest Billy was restless that evening. He was hungry. He borrowed a knife. He moved carefully, quietly. This was not the behavior of a reckless outlaw. It was the behavior of someone who knew danger was close. Pat Garrett had arrived in Fort Sumner quietly with 2 deputies, John Poe and Kip McKinney. Garrett did not announce himself. He did not raise a posse. He went hunting. Garrett knew Billy's habits. He knew his language, Spanish. He knew his friends, and most importantly, he knew Billy trusted faces more than uniforms. Late that night, Billy walked into the darkened bedroom of Pete Maxwell, a friend. The room was pitch black. Unknown to Billy, Pat Garrett was standing inside. What happened next lasted seconds, but those seconds became history. Billy reportedly asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" Who is it? Garrett fired. One shot entered Billy's chest near the heart. Another may have followed. Billy collapsed. No doctor was summoned in time. No priest recorded final words. He died on the floor of a friend's home. Or did he? This is where history fractures. Some witnesses claimed Billy spoke after being shot. Others claimed he died instantly. Garrett's own accounts changed over time. The body was buried the next day without an autopsy. The grave was later disturbed by floods. No photographs were taken. And within years, rumors began. What if the man Garrett killed was not Billy the Kid? What if Billy escaped again? Over the next decades, dozens of men claimed to be Billy the Kid. Most were frauds, but one, Brushy Bill Roberts, presented details so specific that even historians were unsettled. He knew names, locations, habits, things not published in books at the time. Was it coincidence, or was history lying? The official record says Billy died on July 14, 1881. But the emotional truth is more complex. That final night was not about violence, it was about exhaustion. A boy who never chose fame, a man shaped by a brutal system, a legend trapped by his own myth. Billy the Kid did not terrorize the frontier for glory, he survived it. And on his final night, whether he died in Fort Sumner or walked away into obscurity, he faced the same reality faced by countless young men of the Old West. There was no escape from history, only from memory.
As midnight crept closer over Fort Sumner, Billy the Kid felt something he had never truly felt before. Not fear of death, but exhaustion from survival. For years, every sunrise had meant another day hunted, another night sleeping with one eye open.
He had outrun posses, crossed deserts with bleeding feet, and escaped jails designed to break men twice his size. But on that night, July 14, 1881, the weight of it all pressed down on him like the New Mexico heat. Billy was not drunk. He was not reckless. Witnesses later recalled that he was quiet, alert, almost withdrawn. This detail matters because it contradicts the popular image of a carefree gunslinger swaggering toward his fate. Billy knew the territory was tightening around him. He knew Pat Garrett was close. The desert always whispered warnings to those who learned how to listen. Billy had been staying near the Maxwell Ranch, among people who had once protected him. The Maxwells were powerful in Fort Sumner, socially connected, and outwardly friendly to Billy. But loyalty in the Old West was rarely absolute. It bent under pressure, fear, and money. That night, Billy borrowed a butcher knife. Some historians argue this was for cutting meat. Others believe it was a precaution, an instinctive move by a man who sensed danger but could not yet see it. Billy had always trusted instincts more than plans. His survival depended on it. Inside the adobe homes of Fort Sumner, people whispered. They had seen Pat Garrett arrive earlier that day. Some pretended not to notice. Others absolutely did. Garrett was a known figure, tall, quiet, observant. He did not drink heavily. He did not boast. He waited. Pat Garrett's pursuit of Billy the Kid was not purely personal, despite what later biographies claimed. It was political. Garrett had been elected sheriff largely because voters wanted one thing: Billy gone. Alive or dead mattered less than results. Garrett understood that failure would cost him his career and possibly his life. In the West, lawmen who failed did not retire peacefully. Garrett had studied Billy carefully. He knew Billy spoke Spanish fluently. He knew Billy trusted darkness more than daylight, and he knew Billy would seek food late at night when guards were absent and shadows were thick. Garrett positioned himself inside the bedroom of Pete Maxwell. Why Maxwell? Because Garrett believed, correctly, that Billy trusted him enough to walk in unannounced. This decision would later fuel decades of accusations that Billy was betrayed, lured, or sold out. The truth may be more uncomfortable. Pete Maxwell may not have intended to betray Billy, but he may have been too afraid to stop what was happening. Fear was currency in Fort Sumner. Fear of the law, fear of Billy, fear of being caught in between. Around midnight, Billy approached the Maxwell house barefoot, moving silently. Bare feet were not unusual for him. It allowed him to move without sound. This was not arrogance. This was professionalism. When Billy entered the dark room, he did not see Garrett. This is the critical moment, the final seconds that define the legend. Billy sensed someone was there. He asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" "Who is it?" Garrett later claimed Billy recognized him instantly. Others dispute this. The room was nearly pitch black. Garrett himself admitted he could barely see Billy's face, only his outline. What is more likely is this: Billy sensed danger but had not yet identified it. Garrett fired. The bullet struck Billy near the heart. Some accounts say Billy cried out. Some say he fell without a word. Garrett would later claim Billy died instantly. Other witnesses suggested Billy lived long enough to speak. No doctor officially recorded the death. No autopsy was performed. In a modern court of law, this would be considered a catastrophic failure of procedure, but in 1881 New Mexico territory, it was routine. Billy's body was displayed briefly. Friends identified him, though many admitted years later that they did not look closely. Fear again played its role. Fear of Garrett, fear of the law, fear of being associated with the kid, even in death. He was 21 years old, yet almost immediately questions began to surface. Pat Garrett's own accounts of the killing changed over time. In one version, Billy recognized him. In another, Billy was shot before he could react. In later tellings, Garrett portrayed the shooting as unavoidable self-defense. These inconsistencies matter. Historians do not dismiss contradictions, they study them. Even more troubling was the lack of physical evidence. No photographs of the body exist. The grave was later destroyed by floods. The bullet was never recovered, and eyewitness testimony was contradictory at best. Within years, rumors spread that Billy had survived. The idea seems outrageous until you understand the era. Escaped prisoners were common. False identifications happened frequently. Frontier justice moved fast and recorded little. And Billy had escaped death before, multiple times. One man in particular would later reignite the debate: Brushy Bill Roberts. Roberts, an elderly man living in Texas in the early 20th century, claimed he was Billy the Kid. Unlike previous imposters, Roberts possessed intimate knowledge of people, places, and events that had not been published. He spoke Spanish fluently. He knew details about Fort Sumner, Lincoln County, and Billy's personal relationships that were disturbingly accurate. Skeptics dismissed him, but even skeptics admitted something unsettling. Roberts knew too much. Could Billy have switched places with another man? Could Garrett have shot the wrong person? Or did Garrett knowingly allow Billy to escape to avoid further bloodshed? There is no definitive answer, but history is not just about what happened, it's about what was possible. What is undeniable is this: Billy the Kid became more powerful in death than he ever was in life. Newspapers turned him into a myth. Dime novels exaggerated his crimes. Hollywood later transformed him into a symbol, sometimes hero, sometimes villain. But the real Billy was something far more tragic. He was a product of a broken system, a boy raised without protection, a young man who learned that survival required violence, and a legend who never lived long enough to understand what his name would become. That final night in Fort Sumner was not just the end of a life, it was the birth of a question that still haunts American history. Did Billy the Kid die in the dark, or did he disappear into it? The answer may never be known, but the search for it reveals more about America than about Billy himself, about how legends are made, how truths are buried, and how history chooses what it remembers, and sometimes what it forgets.
Years after the gunshot in Fort Sumner faded into legend, the American West moved on, but the story of Billy the Kid refused to die. In saloons, around campfires, and later in newspapers and courtrooms, a single question kept returning like a ghost that would not rest. What if Billy survived? The first whispers began quietly. Ranch hands claimed they had seen Billy years later. Old women swore he passed through towns under a different name. These stories were easy to dismiss until one man stepped forward with a claim so detailed that even hardened historians felt uneasy. His name was Brushy Bill Roberts. By the time Roberts emerged publicly in the late 1940s, he was an old man, frail, nearly blind, and dying of kidney failure. He lived in Hico, Texas, far from the deserts of New Mexico. He did not seek fame, he did not sell books. What he wanted was a pardon. Roberts claimed that he was Billy the Kid and that Pat Garrett had let him live. At first glance, the claim seemed absurd. Decades had passed. Many men had falsely claimed Billy's identity before. But Roberts was different. He knew names that were never printed. He remembered minor incidents no historian had recorded. He spoke Spanish fluently, with the same regional patterns attributed to Billy. He even carried old scars that matched wounds Billy was known to have suffered. Most unsettling of all, Roberts knew Pat Garrett personally. Details of conversations, expressions, and decisions that were not part of any public record.
Skeptics argued that Roberts could have learned these details later. Supporters countered that some information was not available anywhere at the time. The debate split historians into bitter camps. But to understand why this mattered, we must return to Pat Garrett himself. After killing Billy, or claiming to, Garrett did not find peace. His law enforcement career declined. He struggled financially. He became a heavy drinker. He wrote a biography of Billy the Kid that many historians consider unreliable, exaggerating events and reshaping the narrative to justify his actions. Garrett's own death was violent. In 1908, he was shot and killed under mysterious circumstances. No one was ever conclusively punished. The man who ended the Kid's legend died surrounded by the same uncertainty. Was Garrett haunted? Some believe so. Garrett's shifting accounts of Billy's death suggest internal conflict. In some versions, Billy recognized him instantly, forcing Garrett to shoot. In others, Billy never knew who killed him. These contradictions are not minor. They strike at the heart of the story. And then there is the most disturbing possibility. Garrett may have known Billy did not deserve to die. Billy had sought amnesty. He had cooperated with authorities. He had been betrayed by broken promises. In a more civilized system, he might have lived. Could Garrett have intentionally allowed Billy to escape his legend by killing another man, perhaps someone resembling him, while letting Billy vanish? There is no proof, but history does not require certainty to raise doubt. Modern forensic analysis attempted to solve the mystery using photographs of Brushy Bill Roberts and known images of Billy the Kid. Results were inconclusive. Aging, illness, and poor image quality made definitive comparison impossible. DNA testing was also proposed, but the graves involved were either destroyed or inaccessible. The truth, once again, slipped through history's fingers. What remains clear is the transformation of Billy the Kid after death. Newspapers exaggerated his crimes. Dime novels turned him into a superhuman killer. Hollywood later reshaped him repeatedly, sometimes a villain, sometimes a folk hero, sometimes a tragic rebel. Each version reflected the era telling the story. In times of rebellion, Billy was freedom. In times of order, Billy was chaos. In times of doubt, Billy was mystery. But the real Billy was something simpler and sadder. He was a young man who never lived long enough to outgrow the world that hunted him. Whether he died in Fort Sumner or lived quietly under another name, Billy the Kid represents a truth Americans often avoid, that legends are easier to accept than responsibility. It is easier to romanticize violence than to confront the systems that produce it. The West needed an outlaw to close a chapter. Billy was convenient. And so history pulled the trigger. Yet even now, more than a century later, the final night of Billy the Kid refuses to settle into certainty. The darkness of that room in Fort Sumner remains unlit. The question remains unanswered. And perhaps that is why Billy endures. Because as long as doubt exists, so does possibility. And in the American imagination, possibility is immortal.
To understand Billy the Kid, one must first understand the world that created him. The American West was not lawless by accident, it was lawless by design. Expansion moved faster than institutions. Railroads arrived before courts, guns arrived before justice, and young men like Billy grew up in the gap between order and chaos. Billy's psychology was shaped early by loss. His father vanished. His mother died slowly, painfully in front of him. By the time he was 15, he had learned a brutal lesson. Attachment leads to pain. Survival requires distance. Violence becomes easier when love is taken away first. Yet Billy was not a sociopath. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of his character. Contemporary accounts describe him as friendly, humorous, even gentle with children and animals. He read books, he played cards, he sang.
These details do not excuse his crimes, but they complicate them. Violence for Billy was not pleasure, it was currency. In the Wild West, respect was not earned through law, it was enforced through fear. Billy learned quickly that being underestimated was dangerous. His small stature made him vulnerable. His reputation made him untouchable. Every killing added another layer of armor. This is how boys become myths. The legal system of the New Mexico Territory was deeply corrupted. Judges were politically aligned. Sheriffs were underpaid and overpressured. Wealthy ranchers controlled outcomes. When Billy sought amnesty, it was not mercy he wanted, it was stability. He wanted the killing to stop. The promise was made, the promise was broken. That betrayal is crucial. History often asks why Billy did not surrender peacefully after that. The answer is simple. Surrender had already failed him once. Trust, once broken, is rarely repaired, especially in a land where broken promises were buried along with bodies. Billy's final months were marked by isolation. Former allies distanced themselves. Friends feared association. Each night he slept in different places. Each meal felt stolen. This is not freedom. This is erosion. And yet, paradoxically, Billy became more famous the more trapped he felt. Newspapers needed villains. America, recovering from civil war and racing toward industrialization, needed symbols. The outlaw represented everything the modern nation claimed it was leaving behind: wildness, rebellion, moral ambiguity. Billy fit perfectly. After his supposed death, the West moved quickly to sanitize itself. Railroads expanded. Towns became cities. The chaos of frontier life was reframed as heritage, and Billy the Kid became a story told safely in the past tense. But myths do not stay buried. Each generation reshaped Billy to match its anxieties. During the Great Depression, he was portrayed as a folk hero, standing up to corrupt elites. During times of conservative order, he became a cautionary tale. Hollywood exaggerated him endlessly, stretching a short life into an eternal image. None of these versions asked the most uncomfortable question: what responsibility does society bear for the men it hunts? Billy did not emerge from nowhere. He was produced by poverty, instability, corruption, and violence normalized as problem-solving. Remove any one of those factors, and his life might have ended differently. That is why his final night matters so much. Because if Billy truly died that night, then history closed the book violently and moved on. But if Billy survived, if he escaped not just death but identity, then the legend itself becomes the prison he fled. Living anonymously would have been the ultimate escape. No fame, no fear, no gunfire, just obscurity. For a man hunted by his own name, that would have been freedom. As dawn broke over Fort Sumner on July 15, 1881, life continued. Children played, ranchers worked. The Pecos River flowed on, indifferent. Somewhere beneath the soil, or somewhere far away, Billy the Kid's story entered a new phase, not as fact, but as question. And questions, unlike bodies, do not decay.
The desert night of July 14, 1881, stretched endlessly over Fort Sumner. Every shadow seemed larger than it was. Every whisper of wind carried the weight of history. Billy the Kid, standing barefoot in the dim glow of moonlight, could feel it, the inevitability of confrontation. Every moment of his young life had led here: loss, betrayal, survival, and the constant presence of death. But that night, death had not yet claimed him. Historians have pieced together multiple scenarios, each supported by fragments of testimony, newspaper accounts, and later memoirs. Scenario 1, the gunshot that ended it all. Pat Garrett, quietly entering Pete Maxwell's adobe home, found Billy exactly where he expected.
In the darkness, Billy's voice, Spanish, cautious, cut through the silence. "¿Quién es?" Garrett fired. One bullet, then another, and just like that, a boy who had defied death repeatedly, who had outrun posses and jails, fell in the shadows. His life ended at 21. No autopsy, no photograph, just whispers, rumors, and the permanence of a grave in Fort Sumner Cemetery. Yet even in death, Billy became immortal. Newspapers spun the tale, exaggerating kills, glorifying escapes, and transforming a man into legend. He became a symbol: rebellion, freedom, defiance of authority. The kid's myth eclipsed the boy's reality. Scenario 2: the escape into obscurity. Some witnesses later claimed a different ending. Billy survived the shot. Maybe Garrett missed, or maybe he chose not to fire directly. The kid vanished into the night, using the skills that had kept him alive for years. He crossed deserts, hid in towns, adopted new names, and lived quietly as an unremarkable man. Brushy Bill Roberts would later embody this possibility. The details he revealed, names, habits, wounds, were consistent enough to make even skeptical historians pause. In this scenario, Billy did not die a public death. He escaped the legend he had inadvertently created. His life continued silently, blending into the ordinary, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the American imagination forever. Both scenarios converge on a single truth. Billy the Kid's final night embodies the frontier itself. Lawlessness, survival, betrayal, courage, and fear, intertwined into a story so powerful that it continues to captivate over a century later. The legacy of Billy the Kid. Billy's life, brief as it was, left an indelible mark on American history. He became more than an outlaw. He became a mirror reflecting the contradictions of the Wild West. To some, he's a villain, a killer who thrived on chaos. To others, he's a folk hero, a young man rebelling against corruption and broken promises. To historians, he's both, a product of circumstance, a symbol, and a reminder that context shapes perception. Billy's story raises fundamental questions. What responsibility does society bear for the outlaws it produces? How much of history is fact, and how much is myth amplified over time? And ultimately, does truth matter more than legend? These questions ensure that Billy the Kid is not just a character in history books. He's a living presence in Americans' cultural imagination, reminding us that the line between lawman and outlaw, fact and fiction, hero and villain is often thinner than we like to believe. The real story of Billy the Kid's last night may never be fully known, yet the very uncertainty is what keeps his legend alive. Whether he fell in a friend's adobe home under the first light of dawn or slipped into anonymity under a moonlit desert sky, the kid's narrative continues to fascinate, inspire, and provoke debate. History is never finished. Legends are never complete. And some mysteries, like the final hours of Billy the Kid, remain untold, waiting for each new generation to question, explore, and imagine. If this story made you question everything you thought you knew about Billy the Kid, stay with us. Follow, subscribe, and become part of Untold Golden History, where America's forgotten truths come back to life.